Have you ever experienced a moment where reality seemed to hesitate? Like time skipped a beat, a coincidence felt too precise, or a thought you never spoke appeared in front of you seconds later, and instead of brushing it off, you felt a quiet chill, the sense that something fundamental didn't add up. Most people laugh it away, call it déjà vu or blame stress, but a growing number of adults across the U.S. are noticing these moments stack up, forming patterns that feel intentional rather than random. You go about your normal American life, work, family, bills, routines, yet beneath the surface there's an awareness you can't shut down anymore. A feeling that the world you're moving through has layers you were never taught to see. This is where quantum consciousness enters the conversation, not as science fiction, but as a framework that explains why perception itself may be interacting with a hidden reality. Researchers studying observer effects and cognitive perception have already shown that attention alters outcomes at the smallest measurable levels. But what they don't prepare you for is what happens when that awareness turns inward. People who notice these glitches aren't chasing mystery. They're responding to a shift. They start sensing synchronicities that feel personal, emotional reactions that no longer match old patterns, and a growing discomfort with explanations that once felt sufficient. If this resonates, you're not broken and you're not imagining things. You're encountering the same threshold many others are crossing right now. The unsettling part isn't that reality is unstable. It's that consciousness may be far more involved than we were led to believe. And once that realization lands, the question is no longer whether something is wrong, but what happens next. Because the final piece of this story reveals why noticing the glitch is the point of no return. Because once you reach this point, you're no longer just watching content. You're standing at the edge of a shared awareness. What we're doing here isn't passive consumption, it's recognition. When you choose to engage with this video, even through something as simple as a like, you're signaling alignment with others who refuse to sleepwalk through reality. Think of it as a quiet pact, a way of telling the algorithm and each other that this conversation matters, that there are still people willing to look beneath the surface. Subscribing isn't about following a channel, it's about stepping into an ongoing movement of conscious observers who are comparing notes, questioning patterns, and choosing awareness over autopilot. Before we go further, I want you to leave a mark, not for me, but for the others who will find this later. In the comments, write this phrase exactly as it comes to you. I see the pattern. It's a simple line, but it carries intent, and it lets others know they're not alone in noticing the shift. Now stay with me, because what comes next isn't opinion or belief. It's the scientific discovery that explains why these experiences are happening at all, and why consciousness itself may be the missing variable we were never taught to measure. What comes next isn't speculation. It's one of the most unsettling results ever produced by modern physics. In 1978, physicist John Archibald Wheeler at Princeton University designed what became known as the delayed choice experiment. The setup was simple in theory and devastating in implication. A particle of light, a photon, was sent through an apparatus similar to the famous double-slit experiment. But here's the twist. The decision to observe the photon as a particle or allow it to behave like a wave was made after the photon had already passed the point where it should have decided how to behave. According to common sense, the outcome should have been locked in. Cause comes before effect, past before present. That's how we're taught reality works. But the results shattered that assumption. When the measuring device was activated, the photon behaved like a particle. When it wasn't, the photon behaved like a wave. And astonishingly, it behaved that way retroactively, as if the present act of observation reached backward and rewrote the past. Wheeler himself said the experiment suggested that no phenomenon is a phenomenon until it is an observed phenomenon. This wasn't philosophy, it was published physics. Later replications across institutions studying the quantum field confirmed the same conclusion. At the fundamental level of reality, outcomes are not fixed until observation occurs. Reality remains probabilistic, unfinished, until interaction. And this means that you are not merely moving through a completed world. It means that your attention, your focus, your awareness are not passive. They are participatory. This is where the science stops being abstract and starts to feel personal. Because if observation helps determine outcome at the smallest measurable scale, then living unconsciously, reacting without awareness, is not neutral. It's a form of surrender. Most people spend their lives inside patterns they never question, emotionally repeating the same reactions, reinforcing the same outcomes, wondering why nothing changes. But when consciousness expansion begins, when you start observing your thoughts instead of being ruled by them, your behavior shifts, your decisions slow down, your emotional responses change, and slowly, almost quietly, your experience of reality follows. Neuroscientists now confirm what physics hinted at first. The brain predicts reality before it perceives it. What you expect shapes what you notice. What you notice shapes what you act on. And what you act on compounds into a life that either feels mechanical or intentional. If this is unsettling, that's a good sign. It means you're not just hearing information, you're recognizing yourself in it. But this raises a deeper question that science struggled with next. If observation matters this much, then where is the observer actually located? And what happens when awareness turns fully inward? Because the next discovery didn't just challenge physics, it challenged what it means to be conscious at all. That question led researchers away from particles and into fields. In the early 2000s, neuroscientists studying brain coherence began noticing something strange. The brain doesn't operate as isolated regions firing randomly. It synchronizes. At MIT and studies led by Earl Miller around 2013, researchers observed that when attention becomes focused and intentional, distant regions of the brain lock into rhythmic alignment. Neural oscillations fall into coherence. The signal-to-noise ratio improves. Perception sharpens. This isn't metaphor, it's measurable. At the same time, physicists studying the quantum field, the underlying energy field present everywhere, reached a parallel conclusion. Fields don't respond to force alone, they respond to resonance. When a system enters coherence, it couples more efficiently with the field around it. In simple terms, alignment amplifies interaction. And this is where science quietly intersects with lived experience. Because when people begin to shift into coherence, they report the same physical sensations across cultures and backgrounds. A sudden clarity behind the eyes, a subtle tingling in the chest or hands, a calm alertness that replaces mental noise, an intuitive sense of knowing without conscious reasoning. These sensations aren't random. They correlate with moments when internal systems stop competing and start synchronizing. And this explains why you sometimes feel truth before you can articulate it. It explains why intuition doesn't shout, it settles. It explains why, when you slow down and observe instead of react, something in your body relaxes first. Your breathing changes, your muscles soften, your thoughts organize. What's happening isn't mystical, it's resonance. When awareness stabilizes, the nervous system enters coherence. When coherence increases, perception widens. And when perception widens, your interaction with reality changes. This is why people often say, "I don't know how I know, I just do." They're not guessing, they're sensing alignment. Most of modern life pulls you out of this state. Constant alerts, endless urgency, emotional reactivity. It fragments attention and keeps the system noisy. But the moment you pause, observe, and let awareness settle, the noise drops, and something else becomes accessible. This is where the conversation stops being about science alone and becomes deeply human. Because once you realize that clarity isn't something you chase, but something you allow, another truth surfaces. You start to notice how rarely you've been present with yourself, and that realization can feel vulnerable. Not because something is wrong with you, but because you're finally still enough to notice what's been missing. There's a part of this journey that rarely gets talked about, not in books, not in lectures, not in conversations where people expect certainty, because noticing more comes with a cost. When your awareness expands, some rooms start to feel smaller. Conversations you once enjoyed begin to feel hollow. You catch yourself pausing before reacting, and people mistake that silence for distance. There are moments of loneliness in this space, moments where you question whether seeing more has made life heavier instead of lighter, moments where you wish you could go back to the simplicity of not noticing patterns, not feeling shifts, not sensing what's beneath the surface. And sometimes fear creeps in, fear of being misunderstood, fear of sounding different, fear that you're walking ahead without a map. I won't pretend that awareness is always comfortable. It isn't. There are nights when insight doesn't feel empowering. It feels isolating. When doubt whispers, "What if you're overthinking this?" When you realize that growth doesn't always come with applause. But here's the quiet truth I had to learn the hard way. Nothing is wrong with you. The discomfort isn't a signal to retreat. It's a signal that an old version of you can't carry what you're holding anymore. And if any part of this resonates, if you felt that subtle separation, that mix of clarity and uncertainty, you're not the only one standing here. There are others navigating the same internal shift, learning how to live with awareness without losing their humanity. If you feel connected to this, you don't need to announce it or explain it. Just let yourself be seen. A simple response, a quiet gesture of presence, is enough to remind others that this path isn't meant to be walked alone, because what comes next isn't about isolation. It's about learning how to carry awareness with strength, grounding, and intention, and turning what once felt heavy into something that finally feels like direction. This is where everything quietly comes together, because the sensation you've been carrying, the feeling of being different, out of step, slightly misaligned with the world, was never a defect. It was perception. What you once interpreted as restlessness was awareness pushing outward. What felt like discomfort was sensitivity to patterns others move through unconsciously. What seemed like overthinking was your mind refusing to collapse reality into something smaller than it actually is. Across this journey, you've seen how observation alters outcome, how coherence reshapes perception, how resonance changes the way reality responds. None of that was abstract. It described you. The science didn't point outward, it pointed inward. You were never broken for noticing. You were early. Most people adapt themselves to the world as it is presented to them. They inherit beliefs, repeat reactions, and call it normal. But some people experience a subtle resistance to that process. They sense when explanations are incomplete. They feel when systems don't quite line up. And eventually, they stop asking what's wrong with them and start asking what they're actually perceiving. That moment, right there, is the shift. Expanded consciousness doesn't arrive with certainty. It arrives with clarity. Clarity about your internal state. Clarity about how often you are reacting instead of observing. Clarity about how much of life happens automatically when awareness is absent. When that clarity stabilizes, reality feels different. Not because the world changed overnight, but because you did. Decisions slow down. Emotional loops loosen. Patterns that once controlled you become visible enough to step out of. And this is the insight most people never hear. Perception doesn't just reflect reality, it participates in it. Once you see that, you don't need to force change. You begin to align with it. You respond instead of react. You choose instead of repeat. And slowly, the life you experience starts matching the awareness you carry. But here's the unsettling part, the part I won't resolve for you yet. If consciousness plays this much of a role in shaping experience, if awareness is not passive but active, then what we call reality may not be fixed at all. It may be negotiated moment by moment, and that raises a question that can't be answered quickly or comfortably. If reality responds to perception, what happens when perception itself evolves beyond what we were conditioned to use? Sit with that, because the next step isn't about learning more information. It's about noticing how your awareness moves through your own life, today, tomorrow, in the smallest decisions. That's where this actually begins. And what comes next will challenge the way you've been taught to see not just the world, but yourself within it. Before you leave, mark this moment, not for visibility, not for habit, but as a signal. In the comments, write this exact line: I choose awareness, not as a statement to me, but as a marker to yourself and to those who arrive after you. It's a quiet ritual that says you're no longer moving through life on autopilot. You're paying attention. If this journey resonated, don't treat this channel like content. Treat it like a threshold. Subscribing is how you stay connected to a small but growing group of people who are done with surface-level explanations and are willing to explore reality with clarity, discipline, and depth. This isn't for everyone, and that's intentional. And if you're ready to go further, the next step is already waiting for you. The simulation has a glitch. 3 signs. You've finally woken up. That's where we confront the cracks you can't unsee once awareness expands. Your consciousness brought you here. What happens now is your choice.